Greetings, motherfuckers. We're back today to continue our discussion of self defense mechanisms that fuck us in the long run. So, today we're here to talk about the major image distorting defenses, which are highly immature self defense mechanisms that also fall under the umbrella of being depressive, aka they are correlated with later depression. So, if you want to watch this video, go ahead and go over to patreon.com/traumatized motherfuckers. Join for free, and you can watch the presentation form of this here recording, which I do recommend because I put some time and effort into making some pretty slides for us. So check that out, patreon.com. Traumatized motherfuckers, join for free. The link to the video is in the episode description. Check it out. Now let's jump into the major image distorting defenses. So these are protective black and white views that are all encompassing. There is no room for exceptions or nuance. Events, objects, people, ideas, they are this or that. There's a lot of oversimplifications and cut and dry labeling with the major image distorting defenses. And they create mental representations in our minds that lack nuance and complexity. The function of this is easy information sorting. You already made up your mind about what you think about everything, and that makes life a lot easier moving forward. There are these rapid qualifications or judgments that one can live by, which creates very low effort sense making and decision making in one's life. It also creates the justification for various behaviors and promotes a lack of personal awareness and responsibility. So, the first major image distorting defense that we'll look at today is splitting. I'm calling it strategic perceptual sorting. Now, we talk about splitting a lot on this show in various forms. It essentially removes all complexity from appraisals. Events, people, ideas are all good or all bad. And that includes how one observes and judges themselves. Yeah, we're talking about parts. This all allows for rapid judgment and labeling of information without further reflection or more comprehensive considerations beyond that initial judgment that's drawn. Once the judgment has been made, any additional or mismatching information is then simply fucking rejected. And in this way, the black and white distortion is maintained for the individual without ever needing to question it. Their views are fixed and stagnant and stubborn. If you're watching the video form of this presentation, it looks like this. There's an observation of a self, an other, insert noun here. This discrepant data comes into the brain and makes it unhappy. In order to reduce dissonance, the information is sorted into all good or all bad compartmentalizations, and then any mismatching information is just discarded. It's blocked. We don't need to look at that. But nothing in life is good or bad. It doesn't work that way. So the data is grouped together, but it's not destroyed or forgotten. In other words, both piles of good and bad information still exist in the mind. It's just that there's a good set of thoughts and a bad set of thoughts created about all sorts of things. So, for instance, if we're coming at this from the perspective of being a child, in the good pile, mom is our savior. We think of her praise and affection, the times that she feeds us, and the bedtime stories that she tells us. But there's also a bad pile. Mom is a demonic threat. There's the yelling, the spanking, the neglectful events, and the intimidation. We remember both of these piles of good and bad info, but only one at a time. Both categories of information exist, but our emotional state determines which pile is available to us. So the individual is then locked into that perspective until their emotion changes. Something new happens, and they suddenly remember the other set of beliefs. Again, conflicting information or a cohesive view of mom overall is not available at any point. So, for instance, mom comes at us using a friendly tone, and you only recollect the good pile. The next day, mom expresses hostility, and you only recollect the threatening bad pile. But this splitting also applies to the individual's perception of self. So the good pile might say, I am great, kind, caring, funny, smart. And the bad pile might say, I am fucking awful. I'm mean, selfish, intolerable, and so stupid. As such, this explains a lot of our self esteem roller coasters, right? One day we think that we're maybe not God's gift to the earth, but we're pretty okay. And the next day we are quite certain that we are God's scourge upon this planet. It also can contribute to very drastic behavioral changes in line with those self esteem roller coasters. You're going to get out there and conquer the world in a manic state, or you're pretty sure there's absolutely nothing that you're good for, and you fall back into depressive, withdrawn isolation to protect everyone from the threat of you. Additionally, this split perception of self contributes to the parts of the self or the parts of our personalities or our identities that many of us carry. Maybe not exactly dissociative identity disorder level splitting, but many of us have various characterizations of self which are created through this splitting mechanism. Now, the reason that this is so prevalent is because generally our black and white views of self versus others are contrasting. They operate in this kind of seesaw fashion. In other words, in order to consider mom to be good, to be our safe savior as a child, it means that we need to explain why she can also treat us poorly. So therefore, we decide she is good, I am bad. Mom is a good being, I am a bad child. And that explains why she does sometimes yell and spank me. On the other hand, we explain their badness with our goodness. The times that mom screams and spanks me, it's because she's bad because I'm all good. There's this kind of pivoting between the two where someone always has to be labeled good and someone, therefore, is evil. And that explains many events in our small childhood understandings of things. So, just to point this out, the my mother is good and I am bad scheme, this is how pervasive self hatred is created in response to even occasional good enough parenting. Like, mom was being kind today. Mom is good. That means all the other times that she hasn't been good, it's because I've always been the fucking worst. And we might carry that perception with us forever. Additionally, if we believe mom is bad and I am all good, despite any conflicting evidence, this is how narcissists are born in response to critical, neglectful, and abusive parenting. So, the function of splitting is to allow a sense of safety and trust in our caregivers to persist. Our biology prefers that we believe that they are good. Our DNA is programmed to rely on them, and our minds would like to believe that we can depend on them. So we try to reduce our cognitive and emotional dissonance, saying, well, I'm treated badly because they are good and I am bad. So it's all fair. There's a reason why this has taken place. It also helps us to simplify decision making. There's far less processing necessary without the burden of nuance. And it allows us to justify our actions without reflecting on them. It is the way it is. I responded accordingly. There's nothing else to think about here. On the other hand, over long periods of time, splitting is dysfunctional. It is maladaptive if we continue utilizing this self defense without clarifying our thoughts or getting into the complex details of life. Having these dueling oppositional views creates flip flopping in our opinions and our actions, depending on our moment by moment emotional state. This creates unpredictability and bi-directional conviction, which is very confusing for others and for ourselves. What do we think today? How are we going to act today? They don't know. We don't know. No one understands. Also, holding a rigid view of others undermines our later social opportunities. If we believe they are all bad, this leads to dismissal and isolation from the human species. If we believe they are all good, this leads to generally allowing a lot of abuse in our lives. And holding rigid views of ourselves will undermine our lifetime opportunities. If we believe I'm all bad, that can lead to any number of self limitations, right? We might not even go out and attempt to live or to create a life for ourselves because we don't think that we deserve it. If we believe I'm all good, that means we have no self accountability and are generally probably pretty thoughtless in our behaviors. None of these things will return the best results in life. And therefore, while splitting has short term adaptive benefits, it really will screw us over if we continue to only think in black and white terms forever. Moving on, our next major image distorting defense is projective identification, which I'm calling emotionally enmeshing projection. It's like projection taken to a new level of complication. So let's talk about it. With projective identification, an uncomfortable or negatively judged internal event is denied from the individual's conscious awareness. The sensation, instead, is externalized via projection. But rather than denying the externalized experience altogether, as we do in simple projection, saying it doesn't belong to me at all, instead, with projective identification, the event is recognized as belonging to the self, but only in response to the external event. So you can think of the phrase, "This is making me angry," when in fact the individual was probably angry all along and has just found a reason for that anger to exist on the outside. But it gets more complicated than that, because projective identification may also include goading another party to embody the internal experience that is being denied in the self. Then the individual blames the other party for causing the uncomfortable emotion that they finally recognize they are having. In other words, we can think of the phrase, "I'm only blank because you're blank." I'm only angry because you're angry. I'm only anxious because you're anxious. I'm only triggered because you are triggered. If you're watching the video form of this presentation, here is my graphic for it. We do not see this event coming up within ourselves. Instead, we project it outwards and encourage the people around us to take that event on as their own. Then, when they demonstrate the internal event that we are denying, we name it. "Hey, you're doing this, and it's also making me do this." And in this way, everything is extremely confusing. It leads to what I'm calling soupy relationships. No one knows which emotion belongs to whom. This enables emotional enmeshment, scapegoating, codependency, abuse, and generally relational chaos. It does not permit accountability, self-awareness, or healing. So, it's an example of black and white thinking again, because we're saying this feeling does not belong to me at all. It's an all white major distortion. It only belongs to them, the all black major distortion. I, the innocent, only experience this because of them, the guilty party. And that is where this becomes a black and white major distortion. Now, the function of projective identification is that it allows the individual to have their internal experience without needing to reflect on or process that experience. They don't ever really get to the root of it or understand it. This allows offloading causality and responsibility to another party. You did this, right? It permits engagement with unallowable parts of the self through engagement externally with another person, while masking conscious recognition of the self from the self. So it's a way to experience that thought or emotion without requiring any action or accountability for that thought or emotion. In other words, it's another instance of cake having and eating it as well. Now, let's talk about how projective identification is dysfunctional over time. The root of the unwanted internal event is never found. It is never comprehended. The event remains a stranger to the individual. It persists and creates unending conflict internally, which continues to be projected externally. Thus, it ruins healthy relationship opportunities. Others do see this pattern and they will run. But it promotes traumatized relationships because it requires that the other party has a lack of emotional intelligence, acceptance of these accusations being launched their ways, and reactivity/conflict engagement when they're being accused of having this experience themselves or goaded into demonstrating this internal experience for the sake of the other person. So, over time, again, this is dysfunctional because nothing changes internally for the person doing the projective identification. Externally, it requires and promotes unhealthy relationships. It also recreates traumatic events without any resolution ever being found. Those of us who end up in the same relationship or situation over and over again may be engaging with projective identification. It locks the individual in their conflictual emotions, and they're creating of corresponding relationships. And that, my friends and fuckers, are the examples of the major image distorting defenses from our self defense series. And I just want to remind you of a traumatized motherfucker's motto that I say quite often, which is aim for the gray tones. Everything that is considered black or white is some human bullshit. The reality of everything in life is somewhere in between in the much more complex and nuanced gray tones. If you want a lot more information on these self defense mechanisms or any of the other ones that we've covered in the last 2 months, you can go to patreon.com and search traumatized motherfuckers. You can also access this information on a platform that I've created called CPTSD Recovery on Spotify. We are traumatized motherfuckers. That's where I'm taking the Patreon recordings and releasing them on Spotify so you can view them as videos right there on your phone in the Spotify app. And you can also, of course, go to www.t-mfrs.com for more information on the entire project, for the transcripts of these episodes, to get more information about membership and navigate all of the resources there, and also to check out the recent blog series that I've started doing, which is Real Trauma Talk. You might want to take a look. All right. One more reminder to check out patreon.com, traumatized motherfuckers, and join for free to get these bonus episodes that I'm releasing quite often. Honestly, I think it's about a weekly basis at this point. If you are looking for more motherfucking CPTSD recovery information, no strings attached. Join for free. And until I see you next time, take care of yourself out there. Hail yourself and your gray toned perspectives. Hail Archie and Marcus Sparks. And I'll talk to you real soon. Cheers, y'all. Bye bye.